good part, but I've added a couple things to it that touch me. You guys remember, you like to read comics, you pick up the paper and you read the comic Calvin. One day in school, Calvin was giving his teacher the business, and Calvin wasn't a person who probably enjoyed much study. And he was challenging the teacher and asking about his education and what value it has. How's it preparing me for the 21st century? And he stood up and continued, am I getting the skills I'll need to compete effectively in a tough global economy? And dramatically ending his speech with a raised clenched fist, he proclaimed, I want a high-paying job when I get out of here. I want opportunity and I want success. Can you imagine a young person like that? Approaching his desk with her pointer, Mrs. Wormwood looked down at Calvin and said, in that case, young man, I suggest you start working harder. What you get out of school depends upon what you put into it. Isn't that true in life? What you get out of life is what you put into it. Of course, old Calvin responded, well then, forget it. Thankfully, not every child is like Calvin. Listen to this little poem. To get his goodnight kiss, he stood beside my chair one night and raised an eager face to me, a face with love alight. As I gathered in my arms the son God gave to me, I thanked the lad for being good and hoped he'd always be. His little arms crept around my neck, and then I heard him say 4 simple words I shan't forget. 4 words that made me pray. They turned a mirror on my soul, on secrets no one knew. They startled me. I hear them yet. He said, I'd be like you. Over the years, fatherhood has changed an awful lot. We have so many split homes that people are called to do things that aren't normally in their calling, where a mother has to be both mother and father, or a father has to be father and mother in growing up our young people. And a lot of times the grandparents are pulled into being parental figures and helping with the kids. But I don't know that God's perception of what a father is to be or do has changed. So this morning, I'd like for us to remember the words that I read in chapter 27 Genesis. Story of Isaac bestowing his blessing to Jacob. Of course, the blessing was intended for the oldest son Esau, but through deception, the blessing was given to Jacob instead. As you may remember, Isaac and Rebekah had twin sons, Esau and Jacob, who were not anything alike. Esau was an outdoorsman with hairy arms and hands, and he loved hunting and fishing. Jacob was more of a homeboy and spent a lot of time with his mother. In the 27th chapter of Genesis, their father Isaac has grown old and blind, and he decides it's time to pass on the blessing to his oldest son. Now, a Jewish father's blessing was a formal delegation of the father's leadership and authority to the oldest son. And since the oldest son was assuming the leadership responsibilities of the family, he also received a double share of the father's possessions. So the bestowing of the blessing was a very important event. Isaac tells Esau, I'm now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. So Esau leaves, and while he's gone, Rebekah, his mother, seizes the opportunity to secure the blessings for Jacob, who was her favorite son. She quickly prepares some tasty food and tells Jacob to put on Esau's best clothes. To help fool blind old Isaac, she puts goatskins on Jacob's hands and arms to make them feel hairy. Then she sends him in with the food to ask for the blessing. Listen to verses 19 and 20. Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing. Now Isaac was suspicious because Jacob's voice didn't sound like Esau's. So he asked, how did you find it so quickly, my son? And Jacob replies, the Lord your God gave me success. Then in verses 21 and 23, Isaac said to Jacob, come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not. Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy, like those of his brother Esau, so he blessed him. The blessing that was given is found in verses 27 and 29. So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, the smell of my son is like the smell of the field that the Lord has blessed. Now, if you're old farm folks, you're out in the springtime, you smell a fresh plowed field. You put up hay, fresh cut hay. You know, there are a lot of things on the farm. When you harvest your corn, you bring in the wet corn, you get ready for the drying process. You can smell the moist corn, and as it dries and cures. Those are good things for us farm folks. We can relate to that stuff. May God give you of heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord to your brother, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. That was the blessing. After he received the blessing from his father, Jacob left. And shortly after that, Esau came in with a game that he had killed and prepared, and was ready to receive his father's blessing. Listen to verses 33 and 34. Isaac trembled violently and said, who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me too, my father. There's a book that was written, and it's called The Blessing by Dr. Gary Smalley. In this book, he examines the blessings that Isaac bestowed upon Jacob. And he says the blessing contains 4 ingredients that ought to be present in every home today. And when those 4 ingredients are present and practiced consistently, then our children grow up solid, secure, and confident of themselves, able to go out into the world and function normally. But if those ingredients are absent in the home, then too often the child ends up like Esau, steeped in bitterness and anger. The first ingredient, Dr. Smalley says, was a meaningful touch. Notice in verse 22, Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him. And in verse 26 says, then his father Isaac said to him, come here, my son, and kiss me. Now this is not an isolated incident in Scripture. Almost every time a blessing is bestowed in Hebrew culture, it involves touching, the laying on of hands, a kiss, an embrace, something that conveys acceptance and love. In the 10th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, it says the people brought children to Jesus so that he could touch them. Jesus took them and placed them on his knee and laid his hands upon them. The Scripture says he blessed them. Jesus knew exactly what children need to feel loved and accepted, so he touched them and blessed them. It's important to do that in our homes too. When children are very small and can't communicate with love with words because they don't understand words yet, the best way to communicate love to a very small child is by touching them and holding them close and giving the little babies a hug and a squeeze and a kiss. So the first ingredient of a blessing was a meaningful touch. The second ingredient was a spoken message of affection and love. Listen as he blessed his son. In the last part of verse 27, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field. Now I suppose that today's child would not consider it a compliment to be told you smell like a field. Just want you to know that. But to be an outdoorsman like Isaac, who thought he was speaking to Esau, the smell of a field about ready for harvest was a great smell. It was a compliment, a positive message that communicated his love. But you see, too often parents are quick to criticize and remind children of their mistakes. Yeah, dummy, why'd you spill the milk again? You're lazy, you're too fat. Words of criticism that really affect a person. And they don't accomplish much. All they do is cause a child to withdraw. I think there's room for constructive criticism, but it's more important to communicate love through words that say, you're worth something. I'm glad that God gave you to us. You're better than any present I could ever receive. How many of us, when we greet our child or our family and stuff, we hug them and say, I love you? How many of us? It's important. It really is important. It gives them that faith and strength to know that they're wanted and needed. Those are the words that communicate acceptance and love, and they need to be spoken over and over and over again. Even when our children stumble and fall, don't wait until the last minute to do it. The third ingredient of the blessing was assuring them of their value. Notice what Isaac says in verse 28. May God give you of heaven's dew and of earth's richness and abundance of grain and new wine. He's saying you're special, so God will give you the best he has to give. And it is especially important to teach your children. You're so valuable that God even came into our world and died on a cross for you. Last Sunday, Brenda and I, after we finished up in Janesville, we went over to the Pizza Ranch in Elkhorn. And we had a God moment. There was a young family there. We had a little guy, I don't know how old he was, probably 9 years old or so, and two little girls, 5, 6, something like that. And it was obvious that the little boy had some kind of health condition. I don't know exactly what was going on in his life, but you could see that for the family, it was a difficult issue to deal with. The neat thing about it all is I could hear the father keep saying, I am blessed, 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 I am blessed. Remember? And it moved me deeply. You know, a lot of times in our journeys we come across things that are difficult and hard. And some of us don't look at that picture as a blessing, but we look